practice regularly when we, in the morning, if he was a bit annoyed, and we were a bit annoyed an awful lot of time. And I have to admit that we were difficult. I mean, he had 40 boys in the room, and there was 20 of us sitting down. They were usually the merchants' sons and the boys who were going off to Maynooth, or the boys that were going off to St. Mel's. And the rest of us stood around the windows. And he used to say to us, Cricklewood for you, Kilburn for you, Birmingham for you, Luton for you. And we didn't know where any of these places were, but he was right. That's where we all ended up. So that's a little tribute to him. That one there is called Irish History, Reflections on Irish History. And Irish history, when I first approached it, I mean, I came over here, I worked in building sites, worked in lots of dead-end jobs, the kind of things of somebody with no education, no skills. I hadn't been to school most of my childhood because I wasn't well. I was known in Ireland as a delicate child, and I was an only child. So I was both spoiled and delicate, and I used up all the money because there was no social welfare in Ireland, and you had to pay to see a doctor, and I was seeing doctors all the time. Nothing greatly wrong with it. I got pleurisy, which was the first stage of TB when I was 9. I broke my leg when I was 10. I had, I can't go into it, it's boring, a long list of things that delicate children got. And so my mother taught me to read. I didn't go to school most of the time. Went once or twice for a couple of months. And my mother taught me to read, and I learned how to read, and that was a great advantage. I read everything that was available, and there wasn't that much available because this was a time of censorship in Ireland. For instance, most of American literature and English literature was not allowed in Ireland. And you might remember there was a famous case in 1937 where the Mayo chief librarian the job was given to a Protestant. And the Bishop of Mayo thought it wouldn't be appropriate for a Protestant to be choosing books for the Catholic population of that area to be reading. We had a stricter system than even the Vatican Index had. So people like all the ones that you know, I mean Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, all of these, they were all out. Either because they promoted a looser form of living, sexual deviancy was a great bugbear of the whole thing. So there wasn't that much to read, but we opened up a little library and in the town, and I was one of their best customers. I bought everything possible. I took back everything possible and read it. But I read comics, I read all kinds of rubbish. But I did read one or two really good books that made a big impression on me. And the great problem with the autodidactic person, the person who's learning themselves, is they're not guided by anybody. They read everything, and I read everything. I read histories of Spartacus and the Roman Empire, and I was an expert on the Greek wars. I knew more about the cowboys and Indians, most of it spurious and not much use. But I didn't have a structured form of reading. But there are some advantages. We must remember that an awful lot of people didn't go to university. Winston Churchill didn't go to university. George Bernard Shaw went to go to university. A whole collection, Scott Fitzgerald never went to university, neither did Hemingway, a whole collection of people that are quite important in the calendar of world literature. Can you hear me?
You're going off.
Yeah.
What? You're going off.
Going off. Sorry, is it working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can hear me, it's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought it stopped. So a lot of people had learned themselves, and because they weren't brought up to a special tradition, they often stood outside and could bring in new ideas. I mean, the man that had the biggest effect on me when I was about 15 was George Bernard Shaw. I read all of his prefaces, all of his plays. I read his Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism, Communism, and some other democracy. A whole collection of books. And they were really clearly written, and they were very good. H.G. Wells hadn't been to university. So, the benefits of this, now, this is called the Little Priest's Gift to his mother. This is the kind of typical now expressionist we're talking about. Because, in a way, mothers would like their sons to be priests. People would look at me as a small boy and say, "You'd make a lovely priest. Would your mother love to have you as first communion, say your first mass with your mother. This one here is called the little altar boy. I was an altar boy when I was. I feel that nothing is happening here. Am I right?
Something else happening.
Is that better? Yeah?
Just turn it up.
Turn it right up. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you all right.
So what we're talking about in the post-war Ireland is a deeply gendered society where women had one role and men had another role. And that was what I wanted to emphasize in some of my paintings, that divide between the two. And that becomes very, very important when they emigrate, when they leave. Because in the small world of the Irish parish, with its deep divisions between the role of women were often spent longer went to secondary school, boys often didn't. Boys were given a degree of freedom that girls often weren't. They were told that if they were they were told by nuns that they could make a good husband to save the kind of Irish man, the Irish farmer's son, who might be wayward, save him from drink, save him from living a life of, I'm sure, venial sin rather than mortal sin. But there we are. So, this is my mother, losing the customer, as it's called. This is a little picture of our shop. This is a watercolor. But all these, I sold all of these years ago, and I did some of them many years ago. And I can come back to some of them. I better skip through a few of them. Otherwise,
Are they all drunk in the shop?
Pardon?
Are they all drunk in the shop?
No. There was such a pull on them, such a suction out of Ireland. 800,000. The boats were packed. My mother went first, and she left me in charge of the shop. I was 12, but there was nothing else you could do. I had a great time. I entertained my friends. Wonderful time. And then when she came back a year later, things were much worse because there was no way of improving our situation. And so she said to me and my father was working by this time on the bogs. He had to ride 12 miles in the morning and 12 miles back to Lanesborough in Longford, where there was a new power station. And he left me to myself. And I had a great time. But when I came back, my mother said, listen to my father, you have to go to England. And she, in her lovely copper plate hand, she went to Moat Convent, which was a very good convent, and had a secondary school. She knew lovely slabs of Byron, and she was educated before 1921. And so we both, my father was 52, and I was just coming on my 16th birthday. And we arrived across on that boat, packed with people. The old hands drunk, the older men drunk, falling around. The younger people worried and anxious, fearful about the world that they knew nothing about. There was no preparation for it. This is a picture. It's just about. It's called Mammy's Boy, and it doesn't need any more explanation. It's just obvious. This is a picture. I sold this to America called the Crucifix Factory. We never knew in Ireland where all these crucifixes and holy objects were being created. And some of them were being created in Ireland, but most of them were bought from whole factories. There are whole factories in Italy that produce poor quality holy statues that are sold around Ireland and Poland and elsewhere. But an American bought that. He said, I've never seen a picture of that before in my life. He said, I'll buy that, and he paid me a surprising amount of money for it. This one is called the miracle of rural electrification. The very first thing that we had in our house was a little bulb with a cross inside it. And we had nothing else. We had the lights then. We had no other electrical equipment. I remember when one lady who married into the family from America brought an electric kettle. It was a wonder. So this is the miracle of rural electrification. There's the rural pipe, the rural the electrical supply outside. And there is This is called I can't remember some of these. I saw this so long ago that I can't remember some of them. But it's about passion. It's a parish priest, and it's about subdued passion. The priest, we were undergoing in Ireland at that time a huge change of moral attitude. Now that may surprise you, because we always tend to think that we Irish have always been the same, going right back centuries. But let me just go through one or two facts of history that might surprise you. The only study we have of pre-famine Ireland of the number of people who went to Mass was 37% went in 1837. Now we haven't, only in Dublin now, and the bigger towns, have we gone back to that. But we have become somehow the most Catholic people in Europe, in the world. 97% or 93 or 97%, I can't remember now, of us went to Mass every Sunday. And we underwent all the devotions that you would expect for very, very good Catholics. And it began to change us. And we also, the morality, it jumped the seminary wall, so that people weren't marrying. I mean, remember what becoming a priest or a monk or a nun was. You were not putting any strain anymore on the family division of property. You were going into a seminary, and there was going to be no more children produced in that branch of the family. And with the result, the first thing they thought about was controlling the sexual morality of Ireland. And so we became one of the most puritanical people in the world. But something else went side by side with that, and that comes from the famine. The famine is usually looked upon as a terrible disaster for everyone. Well, it is a terrible disaster emotionally. But we must remember that those people who left behind several acres, maybe 10, 20 acres of property. And 2 million people disappeared. So there was 2 million acres, at least, of property opened up that hadn't got to be subdivided in that next generation. 1 million died, and a million and a half left. 2.5 million. We're not quite sure. We don't know. We haven't got the exact figures. Lots of debate about it. We know it's something in that amount. And they went to America mainly, but they went to all the places of the British Empire. They went to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South America, but mainly to America, outside of the domain for the first time of British control. Instead of the old way of romantic love, if you read something like The Midnight Court by the Limerick poet, it's about physical love, it's about romantic love. But after that, the arranged marriage became very much part of Irish life. It wasn't arranged marriage as we might expect now among, for instance, people from Pakistan or India. It was much more informal than that. It was people had caelis around their house, people saw the direction of their children's affection were going, and they encouraged certain types of linkages to happen. Like, for instance, a girl would be encouraged by her parents to look at the guy up the road. He might be 20 years older, but that didn't matter. He had 30 acres of land. 30 acres of land was far better than 20 acres of youth. So the arranged marriage became much more important. And the person that policed that, the main people who policed that outside of the home you would watch the children, but outside of that were the clergy. Country, they began to crack down, and we often heard the boasts about priests turning up at crossroads dances, stopping all that attitude, that romantic attitude to life that might have been possible earlier on. So I did a picture there called The Brothers. That is actually meant to be a mirror. And that one brother emigrates, or several brothers emigrate. And in my own family's case, 7 brothers emigrated, and one of them, my father, married into a small shop in Edgerton. All the rest left to America. And of course, this created great family tensions, because now land was at premium. To become a farmer, to become somebody with a large amount of land, maybe even 20, 30 acres. Remember, what we're looking at is how down the generations the average size of land had to rise, the average size of farm. 30 acres was fine after the famine, you were a rich man. 40 acres by the 1880s, 50 acres by the 1910s, 60 acres to bring up a family. So the actual amount of land, it meant that land had to be concentrated, and it was concentrated through that arranged marriage form and the dowries. But all that began to break down at about the Second World War. It began to break down, first of all, because Ireland had undergone such a drastic shrinking of population that people, it was thought in 1955, 52, 55, that Ireland was going to disappear. The books came out with things like, "Is Ireland dying?" "The Vanishing Irish." There was an Irish National Commission, which is equivalent to the British Royal Commission, on what was happening. Why weren't people marrying? Why were there so many old bachelors? Why were so many people failing to be interested in forming new families and keeping the society going? This one here is called Preparing the Catholic Bedroom. and it's obvious, there's no need for me to explain it, but it's the way the Catholicism and the Church in that time began to take control of Catholic lives. I have no objection to anybody, but whatever religion they are, everybody must have the right to live and believe in their own thoughts. But one has to be very careful about whether one wants to make them national priorities, whether one wants to control things so much and have institutions of control like the ones that we've seen that have all been, in the last 20 years, have all disappeared out of Ireland. We're now having to pay huge amounts of money to people who have been, quote, abused in these. So that control had set in the period between 1880 and 1900. So what about the revolution we had? What about 1921? What about all these gallant patriots who had won Irish freedom for us? Well, remember that Kevin O'Higgins, anybody Kevin O'Higgins? No? Yeah. Kevin O'Higgins was the Minister for Justice. He was assassinated in 1927. And he said, "We are one of the most conservative revolutions in the world." Because the land revolution had occurred before the 1921 period. The land revolution had occurred between Gladstone's various land acts in the 1880s, right up as far as the Balfour and Wheatley Acts of 1910. The land had been handed back to the people. They had to buy it back, but the government supplied the money for them to buy it back. So people were buying their own land back. My family, my father's family, bought the 2 small farms they had from Sir Henry Wilson of Covergran in County Longford, and paid for it. There were still annuities to be paid, like your mortgage. I'll come back to that. Save up your questions, and I'll come back to that afterwards, because a lot of things we could discuss in that. Oops. Yes, this was called, actually been stretched out, this is called The Old Bachelor.
Looking at the news.
Again, it doesn't need any. I'm afraid this is somehow pulled, you can see it right on this, but it's pulled everything out. It's pulled everything out sideways, so this picture should be upright, but anyway, we can't do anything about that, I don't suppose. We can't do anything about it. So it's pulled out, but it's called Building a Republic from Heaven Downwards. It's creating a republic. Now, let me just say a little bit about the history of republicanism. Republicanism was originally a Protestant idea, for this reason. When Martin Luther in 1490 nailed his famous arguments against the Catholic Church in the door of Wittenberg Cathedral, it opened up, he said one thing: we must all be able to speak and read the Bible in German. It must be no longer is it a secret document for the clergy. Everybody must be able to read it. But in doing that, of course, he opened up a book to all kinds of arguments, because everybody who read the Bible came out with something different to it, different from it. People like Calvin came out with Hussites, the Fifth Monarchy men, the Calvinists, all kinds of different varieties. And when these different varieties of religions came between people, a republic was the one thing that agreed to be a secular organization, not a God-sent organization. The chain of being that previously had been there in medieval times between God up in his heaven, the Pope as interpreter of what God's word was, the cardinals and the bishops and the priests, and then the laity. all that was now going to be broken, because all these different people were having different ideas about what God actually wanted. And that's where republicanism came out of. And if we look at where the first republics were, America was a republic. France was a republic under the French Revolution. The Dutch Republic, all these were Protestant states. And everywhere a republic was in Europe, the Catholic Church was against it. Because the Catholic Church, from their point of view, believed in the long line of control, from God down to us, and that there was no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. So that's what a republic was, and we chose a republic. But we would only choose a republic or have a republic if the church was in control of the institutions, so that we didn't have institutions which were governed by secular ideas. In the last 20 years, because we've had to go to Europe, Europe has said, no, you can't have that. And I don't know, there was a discussion yesterday on the radio, it said that we are living in this country in a post-Christian state, because none of our laws are any more governed by ecclesiastical or theological thought.
Was that on Radio 4 yesterday?
It was Radio 4, that's right. And what that means is that if, for instance, a Jehovah's Witness says, I don't want my child to have a blood transfusion, or a Catholic says, I don't want my child, for instance, to have particular forms of contraceptives, if the state decides that it is for the good of the child, they will be the decider of that, then I'm afraid both of these sets of ideas will be out. And the judge will judge on purely secular, legal, non-Christian terms. So this is in a way modernity, and the modernity is coming to Ireland at a rate of knots. You will see objections to it and arguments and protests and all of that. Yeah. This is called the anatomy lesson. And it's based upon some very famous anatomy pictures there's a great one by Rembrandt, teaching people the body, the nature of the body. I'm afraid the world, as seen by the upper echelons of the church, did not see the